There is a hen in central Kentucky that has not had a purchased feed bag opened for her in 11 months. She is not starving. She is not underweight. She is not some rare experimental breed being managed by a university research program. She is a heritage hen in a backyard flock of 8, running a managed pasture rotation on a quarter acre, and her owner's monthly feed spend for the entire flock sits at $6. $6 for 8 hens for 30 days. Not $6 per bird. $6 total for whole grain supplement on the 3 coldest weeks of January when the ground was frozen and forage was temporarily unavailable. The rest of the year, 0. Here's the first question. If 6 documented heritage breeds can forage 60 to 70% of their own caloric intake on managed pasture, a figure appearing in American agricultural literature since at least the 1936 USDA Yearbook, why does every major hatchery catalog in the United States lead with breeds that require full purchased feed rations to survive? Here is the second question. The math on a self-foraging flock is not complicated. A heritage hen foraging 70% of her own diet reduces her owner's annual feed spend by roughly $40 per bird per year. A flock of 8, $320 annually. A flock of 20, $800. That reduction compounds every year the flock runs. What exactly does a hatchery sell to a farmer whose flock feeds itself? I will show you both answers. But first, a third question, and this one I want you to hold until the end. Every breed on this list was in widespread commercial production before 1950. Every one of them disappeared from mainstream hatchery catalogs within a single decade after 1955. What happened in that decade? And why does the answer appear in a single USDA document that has been sitting in a land-grant university archive since 1958? Stay with me. The antagonist is not complicated. The American commercial feed industry generates approximately $28 billion annually from backyard and small flock poultry keepers. That number does not exist because heritage farmers are wasteful. It exists because the breeds being sold to most backyard farmers were engineered for total feed dependency. Birds developed for controlled confinement environments where no forage is available, where the entire caloric requirement arrives in a bag, where the farmer's relationship with the supply chain is not optional. Put a confinement-optimized bird in a pasture, and she will stand at the feeder and wait. Not because she is lazy, because foraging behavior is a genetic trait, and that trait was selected out of commercial breeds over 70 years of deliberate breeding pressure, because a bird that feeds herself is a bird whose owner buys less feed. What cannot be monetized is what gets removed from the catalog. The 6 breeds that were removed are the subject of this video. Each one forages aggressively. Each one is documented in pre-1955 agricultural literature as a low-input pasture bird. Each one disappeared from commercial prominence within a decade of each other. That is not coincidence. That is a pattern, and a pattern has a cause. The first breed is the Ancona. She arrived from Italy in the 1850s and was documented in American breed registries by 1888 as one of the most aggressive foragers in the laying breed category. A mottled black and white bird so fast on her feet and so alert to her environment that she covers more ground per day than any other breed on this list. Documented forage contribution on well-managed pasture, 60 to 70% of daily caloric intake. A mature Ancona hen lays between 220 and 280 white eggs annually and reaches that production number while consuming a fraction of the purchased feed her catalog-promoted counterparts require. She cannot be confined effectively. That sentence is the entire explanation for her absence from commercial hatchery catalogs. A bird that cannot be confined cannot be raised in the production environment the commercial supply chain was built around. She was not buried because she was difficult. She was buried because she was incompatible with dependency. The second breed is the Hamburg. Dutch agricultural records document her as far back as the 1600s, known specifically as the everyday layer, a bird producing 200 to 250 white eggs annually on pure pasture with minimal grain supplementation. She weighs under 4 pounds at maturity, meaning her caloric requirement is proportionally lower than any dual-purpose breed, and she meets most of that requirement herself on any land with reasonable insect and plant diversity. Now you are 3.5 minutes in. I need you to stay, because what comes next is the piece most people miss. And it is the piece that explains not just why these breeds disappeared, but how the disappearance was executed without a single policy, a single ban, a single public decision anyone could point to and challenge. The 1958 USDA Internal Extension Service Curriculum Review, a document available in the National Agricultural Library Archive, recommended standardizing backyard poultry extension recommendations around breeds compatible with commercial feed programs. The language is bureaucratic. The effect was not. Within 5 years of that recommendation, land-grant university extension services across the United States had quietly shifted their starter breed recommendations toward high-input commercial strains. The Hamburg, the Ancona, and every other self-foraging breed on this list were not removed from the literature. They were simply no longer mentioned in the documents that new farmers actually read. Omission is cleaner than prohibition. You cannot argue with the silence. The third breed is the Campine. Belgian agricultural records document her since the 1400s, 500 years of continuous production on the Campine Plateau, where farmers maintained her specifically because she fed herself off land that could not support grain agriculture. Documented forage contribution, 65 to 70% on adequate pasture. Annual egg production, 150 to 200 white eggs with near zero purchased feed input in the active foraging season. She is listed as critical by the Livestock Conservancy, the most endangered designation they assign. A breed with 500 years of documented production history is one disinterested generation from permanent extinction. That is not a natural outcome. That is what omission does over 50 years. The fourth breed is the Fayoumi. She comes from Egypt and has been a domestic agricultural breed for at least 2,000 years, a fact that should stop you for a moment. 2,000 years of continuous selection for one environment. Low input, hot climate, high forage production with minimal human management. She forages so independently and so efficiently that experienced heritage farmers describe her management requirement as close to zero. She lays 150 to 180 eggs annually. She is resistant to common poultry diseases that require pharmaceutical intervention in confinement flocks, and she has been doing this since before the Roman Empire had a poultry supply catalog. The industry's response to 2,000 years of documented low-input performance was to not mention her. The fifth breed is the Icelandic chicken, one of the purest landrace breeds in existence, brought to Iceland by Norse settlers around 870 AD and maintained in near-genetic isolation for over 1,000 years on an island where imported feed was expensive, unavailable, or both. The Icelandic hen forages aggressively across rocky, marginal terrain that would strand a commercial layer at the feeder. She lays 150 to 180 eggs annually. She is cold-hardy to temperatures that damage confinement breeds, and she breeds true with a genetic diversity that commercial hybrid strains lost decades ago when their breeding programs narrowed to single-trait selection. She has no catalog page at any major American hatchery. She is available through a small network of preservation breeders. She generates no recurring feed revenue because her owners largely do not purchase recurring feed. The sixth breed is the Buckeye, the only American breed developed entirely by a woman, Nettie Metcalf of Warren, Ohio, in 1896, and the only American breed on this list not descended from European or Asian landrace stock. Metcalf built her specifically for Midwest pasture conditions, cold tolerance, aggressive foraging behavior, pea comb for frostbite resistance, and a temperament calm enough to manage without the chronic stress responses that suppress laying in high-strung Mediterranean breeds. A self-replacing Buckeye flock on managed pasture rotation runs at 11 to 14 cents per egg by year 3 when restocking costs disappear. A commercial highline hybrid in the same yard runs at 28 to 34 cents per egg when replacement costs are factored across the flock's productive lifespan. The difference is not a rounding error. It is the recurring revenue the industry collects by selling you a breed that cannot do what the Buckeye does for free. Here is the answer to the third question. The 1958 extension curriculum shift did not happen because heritage breeds stopped working. The USDA document does not claim that. It claims something more honest and more damning. that standardizing recommendations around commercial breeds would simplify the extension agent's educational workload and align backyard farming recommendations with the existing commercial supply chain infrastructure. Simplify, align. 2 words: 50 years of disappeared breeds. The 6 breeds in this video are still here. The Livestock Conservancy lists most of them. The breeding registries exist. The genetics survived, barely, in the hands of farmers who never stopped running them because the birds kept working regardless of whether anyone was printing their names in a catalog. One Ancona hen right now, moving across a pasture at a speed that makes the feeder irrelevant, covering 70% of her own caloric requirement with her own feed on her own land, generating zero feed revenue for a $28 billion industry that spent 60 years making sure you never learned her name. That is what was taken. That is what is available. The archive is open. The breeds are there. The omission ends when you stop reading their catalog.